Hi, welcome to Vaping in 2019, understanding the product and cultural trends of teen vaping. My name is Jeff Jordan, President and Executive Creative Director of Rescue, the behavior change agency. We've been working on tobacco prevention for nearly 20 years. And for the last couple of years, we've been working on e-cigarettes and vaping, particularly amongst teens. Now, if you've been paying attention to any of the news about teens and vaping, you've noticed some disturbing trends. The headlines are coming from left and right. Teen vaping on the rise, teen vaping becoming an epidemic, the Surgeon General calling for all hands on deck to battle teen vaping, and teens now struggling with the addiction that's coming from these new vaping products that they may or may not have known were actually addictive. So let's take a quick look at the numbers to understand exactly what's going on. Teen vaping data tends to come from two primary sources. The first one, from the CDC, is the Youth Risk Behavior Survey that's taken every couple years. Now, we right now only really have 2015 and 2017 data to look at, and when we look at it, we see that in 2015, teen vaping rates were in about 20%, depending on which grade you were looking at, from about 19% for 9th graders all the way up to about 27% for 12th graders. But an interesting thing that we saw was that in 2017, those numbers went down pretty significantly, all the way down to the high teens. Now, that doesn't seem to jive with the different headlines that we're hearing. So why are we hearing all these headlines about teen vaping going through the roof? And that's really from 2018 data. Now, while the Wire BS doesn't provide us with that data, a different study, the Monitoring the Future study, does. So to understand the 2018 trends and what caused all of the headlines in December, we turn to the Monitoring the Future study. The Monitoring the Future study has collected data on teen vaping since 2015, and we see a pretty interesting trend. We begin in 2015 with 10th graders at about 13%. That number drops to about 11% in 2016 and comes back up to about 13% in 2017. But then we see the 2018 numbers, and this is where the headlines came from. We see that for 10th graders, teen vaping went up to nearly 22%. This huge increase in vaping has caused alarm across tobacco control and the public health community. But this trend, this pattern of going down and then going back up, is not a typical trend for a risk behavior epidemic. Usually you would expect to see something going up pretty consistently without any dips, and especially not with the huge decrease that we saw between 2015 and 2017 in the Youth Risk Behavior Survey. So this creates a really important question for us, which is that, are we seeing a single trend in teen vaping, or are we seeing different phenomenon being hidden in the same data? So there's an argument for this actually being different trends, and that's really important for us when we think about prevention. When we think about 2015 and 2016, and we saw e-cigarettes really begin to rise with teens, that first wave of concern, we saw a lot of advertising and products that were really around adults trying to quit smoking. A lot of the marketing was about how vaping was better or safer than cigarettes for adults who were currently addicted to smoking. Now, this didn't stop teens from using, but it certainly was a specific kind of product that was being advertised, a product for adults to use for cessation. Now, every single campaign didn't quite fit that description. Here you see a number of examples from our friends over at Trinkets and Trash showing all the different kinds of strategies, but generally what you see is a very adult-driven strategy. Even the lifestyle marketing that you see from some of the brands, it's fairly adult-oriented. Now, what happened between 2015 and 2017 and 2018 is that the brands and the marketing changed, namely JUUL. When we started to see JUUL come out and JUUL marketing come out, what we started to see was highly youth-oriented, colorful, clean, youth culture-oriented advertising. And this advertising was really focused on making vaping look cool. Now, whatever their strategy might be, or whatever the strategy that they explain is, there's no question that there's a huge difference between the early e-cigarette marketing and the later e-cigarette marketing that we saw. The colors, the age of models, the messages, and the way that they made the behavior look, it was no longer about quitting. It was no longer about a safer product. It was about a new product, like a new technology, a new fad, an exciting new thing for someone to try. And that seemed to have appealed to different teens. So we have some data today in this video to share with you about exactly who was a part of each of these fads of e-cigarettes and vaping. And our theory here is that we had two totally different trends. Our first trend here is all the e-cigarettes, all the mods and the traditional e-cigarette products that were designed to replace cigarettes, to look like cigarettes. We theorized that that was the first trend, and that it peaked in 2015 for teenagers, and that from every year since then, that those products have actually gone down amongst teens. And then that there's a separate trend, a completely different trend, possibly with a completely different group of teens, which is the JUUL trend, that has actually replaced and superseded the trend that we saw with other e-cigs. So what do we mean by this? Well, we think that there's evidence to suggest that there's actually two completely different phenomena going on that are affecting two totally different groups of teens. And that understanding who is being affected by each of these phenomena can be very helpful in developing the right kind of campaigns to reduce and prevent the continued growth of e-cigarette use. So let's talk about who these teens might be. Now, if you've seen any of our videos, you've probably seen me talking about peer crowds. So peer crowds are an evidence-based segmentation approach, and they're the macro level connections between peer groups with the similar interests, lifestyles, influencers, and habits. There's plenty of videos for you to watch to learn more about peer crowds, and I encourage you to do so. But very quickly, we have 5 peer crowds that we found as we've done research around the country for over a decade. And that is mainstream teens, who tend to be kind of the middle of the road teens, the more kind of friendly, kind of average teens. Then we have popular teens, which are always kind of chasing trends. They're always trying to be fashionable. This is the quintessential football player, cheerleader, etc. Alternative teens, who tend to be counterculture, rebellious, hipsters, emos, goths, skaters, etc., that are all trying to kind of be different from the norm, from the average popular teen. Country teens that are much more connected to kind of the outdoors, to mudding and trucking and being all American. And then finally, hip-hop teens that are really defined by the idea of overcoming a struggle, proving their success, showing their strength and their bravado with their fashion and styles and personality. These 5 peer crowds are the most common peer crowds that we find no matter where in the country we go, no matter how small or how large the city is. And we've been fortunate enough through our work with the Virginia Foundation for Healthy Youth and the Virginia Department of Health to have peer crowds measured in the Virginia Youth Risk Behavior Survey. So what this allows us to do is it allows us to examine who was a part of the 2015 e-cigarette trend and who was a part of the 2017 e-cigarette trend. Are we seeing the same kinds of youth, or are we seeing a whole different kind of phenomenon? So very quickly, the Virginia Youth Survey is their version of the Youth Risk Behavior Survey. It's implemented every 2 years with both middle school and high school students. We're going to just look at the high school data because that's who the peer crowds were measured. And we use the I-based survey to measure this data. What is the I-based survey? It's our tool to measure peer crowd identification. It is a 2-page survey, 1 page with all females, 1 page with all males, where young people select the people who look like they would best fit into their group of friends and least fit into their group of friends. That allows us to provide them scores that allow us to measure which peer crowds they're most influenced by. All right, so let's first begin by looking at the 2015 versus 2017 tobacco use data in Virginia. Now remember, I showed you this data for the National Youth Risk Behavior Survey. This is specifically just for the state of Virginia, which allows us to look at more data than is available for the national survey. Now what we saw in Virginia was declines across the board. Cigarette smoking in the past 30 days went down from 7.9% to 5.9%. Cigarillo and cigars from 6.9 to 5.9. Smokeless tobacco or chew tobacco use from 5% to 3.9%. Even e-cigarette and vaping went down from 14.1% to 11.9%, similar to the national trend that we saw on the YRBS that I showed you earlier. And then finally, all of this adds up to a huge decrease in any past 30-day tobacco use, any product use. 22% of Virginia teens had used any tobacco product in 2015, and that went down to 14.9% in 2017. There's a lot of factors that contributed to this. We have some wonderful campaigns that we work with the Virginia Foundation for Healthy Youth on. They're in Virginia, as well as some wonderful national campaigns that have been running across these years. So a lot of credit to go around for these wonderful reductions. Now the question is though, were these reductions equal across the board? Was the trend of vaping and e-cigarettes something that went up and went down pretty evenly across peer crowds? Well, we can actually look at that with the Virginia data. So first, let's look at cigarettes to kind of ground us here. what we saw overall, there was a 2-point decrease in cigarette smoking from 7.9 to 5.9%. Now, when we look at popular teens, went down about 1 point. Mainstream teens went down about 2 points. Hip hop teens went down pretty big from 10.8% all the way down to 7.7%. Country teens actually went up slightly from 6.9 to 8.5%. And then finally, alternative teens, the biggest decline from 16.8 to 11.6%. Now what we see here is besides a small increase in country, we saw a fairly consistent reduction in cigarette smoking across the board, which contributed to an overall reduction from 7.9 to 5.9. So now let's take a look at vaping. Vaping also saw a reduction. We saw that in 2015, 16.3% of Virginia teens had vaped in the past 30 days, while only 11.9% of them had vaped in the past 30 days in 2017. So the question is, what did this look like when we looked at individual peer crowds? When we look at popular teens, vaping actually went up. It went up from 15.6% all the way up to 18.3% in a year when overall vaping went down. For mainstream teens, it went down from 4% to 2.4%. For hip hop teens, it went down from 26.3% to 14.6%. Country teens from 16.9 to 10.9. And finally, alternative teens from 21.2% all the way down to 10.4%. So what does this mean? What we're seeing is that there's 3 groups, high-risk groups, traditionally high-risk groups of hip-hop, country, and alternative, that were driving the early e-cig trends in Virginia, going down significantly between 2015 and 2017, while the more traditionally moderate risk group of popular teens actually going up at the same time. This suggests that while high-risk teens drove early vaping trends, the lower-risk popular teens were the ones that were actually driving the current trends and what we're seeing today in 2017 and 2018. What does this suggest is that the different products are actually appealing to different kinds of teenagers. And there may be different reasons why those different kinds of teenagers are adopting and possibly dropping this new risk behavior. Now, also helpful is for us to take a look at any tobacco use by peer crowd to see how that changed in Virginia. We saw, first of all, there was a big decrease from 22.1% to 14.9% any past 30-day tobacco use. We see popular teens had a small decline from 22 to 18.9%, mainstream from 6 to 3%, hip hop teens from 33.7% all the way down to 21.2%, country teens from 24.5% down to 17.2%, and then alternative teens from 29.3% all the way down to 17%. Now what are we seeing here again is that for our high-risk groups that in 2015 were by far the most at risk to use tobacco, their tobacco use rates went down significantly, while popular teens who were at moderate risk in 2015 are now pretty much even with the high-risk groups in 2017. And why is that? Because of vaping. So why does all of this matter? Well, each of these groups is different. Their values are different, what they care about is different. And by understanding who is using the products and when, we can make sure that new vaping prevention campaigns understand who current vapers are and actually speak to them based on their values, what they care about, and the reasons why they may be vaping. So here's an example of what I'm talking about. We picked just 5 values of the many values that we measure across some of our studies. Here on the left, you can see I feel corporations should make money in ethical ways. We also see I go out of my way to support local music and artists. I use clothes to express my identity. I care about being fashionable, and I care about keeping my body free from toxins and unhealthy substances. Across these 5 values, we see very different trends for peer crowds. When we look at popular teens, which is the magenta bar, we see that they strongly agree with things like using clothes to express my identity, being fashionable, and keeping their body clear from toxins. In contrast, a group like country disagrees with all 3 of those values. A group like hip hop agrees with them, mainstream agrees with them. Alternative has its own pattern. It wants to support local artists. They believe that corporations should make money in an ethical way, but they don't agree that they want to keep their body free from toxins. They don't agree that they want to be fashionable, etc. So what's interesting about these values is when you think about the vaping marketing that occurred in 2016, 2017, and 2018, and what it looked like and what it was designed to do. It was fashionable, It looked clean. It was all about a clean and kind of healthy looking behavior and product. And who does that appeal to? Well, one of the groups that is most driven by high fashionable, keeping their body clean from toxins, etc., are popular teens. And so it makes sense that they're one of the groups that this marketing was most appealing to, because they are concerned about doing what's cool, what's popular, what's trendy. Some of these other groups, like alternative and like hip hop and country, they don't necessarily agree with all of these values. And so seeing something promoted as fashionable and trendy is not going to be as appealing to country, for example, or even to alternative teens, the way it's going to be appealing to popular teens. So this is really important for us to keep in mind as we start to develop new vaping prevention campaigns for what is a whole new group of vapers. These aren't the ones that we saw in 2015 and 2016. This is a new group of teens that are vaping. These are the popular teen vapers. So what do we know about them? Well, we fortunately had a chance to already do some research directly with popular teens who vape, particularly who are using JUUL products. And what we're hearing from them first and foremost is they hate cigarettes and are well aware of all of their harmful effects. Now, this is good news for us in public health, because hopefully it means that there are some protective factors holding back these teens from moving from vaping to traditional combustible products, but we can't count on that attitude to hold on. One of the concerns that we have here at Rescue is that the popular teens tend to experiment with cigarette smoking in young adulthood as non-daily smokers, particularly when they go out, when they're at parties, when they're at clubs, etc. And so we're really concerned that because these are the teens that are taking on the new JUUL and vaping trend, that the intermittent tobacco use rate for young adults is going to go up over the next few years. And that's something really to pay attention to. They may not pick up cigarettes in high school, but more of them may now pick up cigarettes in college and young adulthood because of this new vaping trend. Something to watch out for. We also see that they enjoy perceived minor risks of vaping to rebel. So they want to rebel, but they don't want to put their future at risk. They don't want to put their college, their health, their sport, their sporting, etc. They don't want to put any of those things at risk. And what they're seeing with vaping is that it gives them just enough to be rebellious. It's like speeding in terms of their perceived amount of risk. And so what we need to do in public health is convince them that it is not a minor risk. That vaping is not just like a small thing that they can do, that they can get away with, that it is harmful. Another thing that we've learned is that they don't believe that they can be addicted and are not motivated by addiction messaging alone. So this is a really important piece, because, well, that's one of the biggest risks that we're concerned about in public health, is that teens will become addicted to the nicotine in the new products, and that will lead them to other products. That, though, is not a concern for popular teens, and it can't be the only thing that we message about, because those messages are pretty much going over their head, or they're just being ignored. They are concerned, though, about the chemicals inside of vaping and their potential harms. And so this is something where we do have an opportunity to provide more education to these teens. One of the interesting things that we've also learned from popular teens is that they don't believe that they've been manipulated by the industry or by its marketing, but they are concerned about what the industry is not telling them. And so in the early 2000s, there was a lot of success in tobacco control by talking about all the things that the tobacco industry had done, all of the lives that the tobacco industry had destroyed, had damaged, all the people that it had given cancer to, etc., despite knowing all of the harms of their products. Because we're not seeing that kind of damage caused by vaping, teens are not as concerned about what the industry is doing. But what they are concerned about is what aren't they telling them about the chemicals and the products. And so that is somewhere where we do have an opportunity to talk about what is really inside of these products and what potential harms really exist, because it's not just water vapor, and for a lot of teens that is news, and that is something that they are concerned about, especially popular teens, because as you saw in the previous slide, popular teens are concerned about toxins and kind of keeping their bodies healthy. So as we move forward with tackling vaping in 2019, one of the things we're going to want to know is, will the risk for smoking cigarettes increase the way it did for more susceptible teens? So what we saw in early research with e-cigarettes and vaping is that vaping in 2014, 2015 was associated with increased youth cigarette smoking and other tobacco product use in later years. Now, if this is truly two different trends and two different groups of teens, we are likely to see a different pattern emerge from this group that has just started vaping in 2017 and 2018 with the new JUUL products. So what does that mean is we want to be watching and seeing, does this immediately turn into a cigarette smoking trend for a group that was so committed to not smoking and to hating tobacco products? Or is that something that down the line increases risk, for example, in young adulthood, but doesn't immediately increase risk? So that's something that we're watching and are concerned about. We are also looking at how much will vaping fade as a technological fad. The first wave of vaping in 2015 and 2016 was already declining pretty significantly from 2015 to 2016 and 2017 before the JUUL products were introduced. So the question is, will we see another peak and reduction just naturally by the natural curve of innovation that teens will get over this new technology? We are hoping that some of that will help us with combating the increasing epidemic. We also want to make sure that teens understand that this is not just water, this is not just water vapor. There are chemicals in these products, and by exposing that, we can disrupt this image that this is a clean, techie product. That is what popular teens are driven to. They're driven to the idea that this is clean, safe, new, exciting. It's like getting a new iPhone. And we have to convince them that no, these are chemicals, this is harmful, and this is not something you should be putting in your body. By doing that, we disrupt the image that has been created by the industry as to promote these as a safe, fun product. And finally, once there is more visibility of JUUL addiction and other vaping addiction, will the addiction messages possibly be more powerful? So right now, teens don't really seem to think they're at risk for addiction, and messages about addiction don't really seem to be convincing them. But if they start to see more evidence of addiction in their own natural environment, that may change, and we may have a new opportunity to tackle this new product through addiction messaging when there's more evidence of it. So that's something we want to monitor through focus groups. So this is just the first of a series of videos that we're going to do this year as we work through the vaping and e-cigarette epidemic. We encourage you to come back and check out our YouTube page. Make sure to subscribe to check out the next video where we're going to be talking about some sample messages that we're testing and putting out into the field. Until then, thank you very much and good luck on your efforts to tackle the vaping epidemic.